Hello, and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report on NTD television. I'm Steve Lance. The latest GDP numbers are out today, revealing an unpleasant trend for the economy. It's shrinking. The White House is desperately trying to brush off the bad news.
And whether or not we are in a recession. Both Chairman Powell and many of the significant banking personnel and economists say we're not in a recession. But let me just give you what the facts are in terms of the state of the economy. Number one, we have a record job market of record unemployment of 3.6% today.
The economy shrank by nearly 1% during the second quarter. This is a trend in the wrong direction. The first quarter, the economy shrank by 1.6%, and now a decline of 1%. Considering the GDP is an indicator of our economy's overall size and health, this decline is bad news. 2 consecutive quarters of decline is a trend that many economists define as a recession. But the White House has been working all week to message to Americans that 2 quarters of negative growth does not define a recession. Here's President Biden today trying to make the case for why there are other factors to consider when assessing the state of the economy. Has the United States economy officially entered into a recession? What exactly does it mean to be in a recession, and how is skyrocketing inflation contributing to the shrinking economy? We're happy to have with us Heritage Foundation's E.J. Antoni. E.J. Antoni, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
E.J., my first question for you, what is a recession, and more importantly, are we in one?
So a recession is essentially just a prolonged period of economic contraction, and that's exactly what we find ourselves in right now. The classic definition for that is when you have 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth, and that's, again, exactly what we've had for the first quarter and now the second quarter of 2022.
EJ, we're obviously seeing and feeling the pain at the pump and at the grocery store. As the reality of this all sets in, can things get worse, or where do you see things going from here?
You know, it's a very difficult question to answer where things are going to go looking forward, because so much of it depends on reversing the bad government policies that have got us here in the first place. And unfortunately, we don't really have much good news. The latest coming out of Washington is that Joe Manchin apparently has signed off on a new version of the Build Back Better Green New Deal boondoggle that the Biden administration has been trying to push through using the reconciliation process. So that is only going to add fuel to the inflationary fire. It is only going to continue the stagnant economic growth that we've seen so far this year.
That was actually going to be my next question for you. Senator Manchin, who's just tested positive for the CCP virus, he seems to have budged on this massive Build Back Better plan. It's now being dubbed, or as an offshoot of Build Back Better, the Inflation Reduction Act. What are some of the things in there that you think will have a counter effect to bringing the inflation down?
Well, a key one is the fact that it's going to tax American coal, oil, and natural gas, really the backbone of our energy markets and the backbone of the American economy. And if you're trying to bring down prices, if you're trying to fight inflation, the last thing you want to do is increase the costs of production. But that is entirely what this bill aims to do.
Just kind of on a slightly different note, where does the housing market go from here between another historic rate hike and the economy in recession? Where does this all bottom out, and is the worst yet to come in terms of housing?
You know, the housing market is really in a very unique place right now. So again, it's very difficult to predict where it's going to go moving forward. What makes the current market so unique is the fact that the Federal Reserve has purchased so much debt that is backed by American mortgages. And that can very well affect what the Federal Reserve does moving forward in terms of interest rates. And this Federal Reserve, once again, unfortunately, has proven to be highly unpredictable. They have said one thing and then turned around and done another. So we really do not know which way this Federal Reserve is going to go. They are likely going to continue raising interest rates, at least for the short term. but it's unclear whether or not Jerome Powell is going to have the spine to continue pushing rates as high as they need to go to really combat inflation.
E.J. Antoni, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And President Biden, in his speech earlier today, praised Democrats' newly agreed upon budget bill, saying it will help tame inflation. But Republicans say exactly the opposite. Here's NTD's Melina Wisecup with the details.
After 1 year of negotiation talks between Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Senate Leader Chuck Schumer, the two have come to an agreement on the Democrats' reconciliation bill. Reconciliation is a word that refers to policy changes to the federal budget. This new bill, dubbed by Democrats as the Inflation Fighting Act of 2022, has many of the provisions that were in that Build Back Better bill, minus the social welfare programs. Here's a look at what's in it. There's hundreds of billions of dollars for renewable energy tax credits to incentivize people to buy electric cars and encourage domestic production of things like solar panels and windmills. They're extending the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, through 2025. And there's an attempt to lower the price of prescription drugs to make sure that seniors and disabled Americans won't pay more than $2,000 per year for pharmacy medicines. And there's over $100 billion that will be set aside for the IRS to give them more enforcement measures to monitor Americans' tax return paperwork. And there's a 15% minimum tax on big corporations. Now, Democrats' goal with this bill is to generate around $700 billion worth of revenue, and $300 billion of that revenue would go towards lowering the federal deficit. President Biden earlier today, when he gave his remarks on the economy, insisted that this bill would help lower inflation. However, I spoke to Senator Mike Braun, who says the exact opposite. Senator Braun sits on the Budget Committee, and he explained to me why he's not counting on this bill to generate revenue. Here's a bit of our conversation.
This to me looks like something that's going to add to the issue. And of course, there are things in there everybody's going to like here when you're spending money again. That's what makes the place dysfunctional. That's why I put a budget out last week that says this is just another addition to what's got us $30 trillion in debt. Think about it. I've been here only 3.5 years, and we were 18 trillion in debt. Now we're 30, and the same people putting out this bill put the blueprint out for the future of America that we're going to be $45 trillion in debt in 10 years.
You know, and I think the question becomes, one could argue that over 10 years, if everything goes as smoothly, they will be able to take down the deficit a little bit by, if everything goes smoothly, but...
Very easy answer to that.
Okay.
How smoothly has that occurred over the last 2 decades? And the only thing that smoothly occurred is that our debt has gone up. This place is more dysfunctional, and most Americans wonder what we're doing here. My advice would be we do less here until we start doing things better and start paying for it and not borrowing it from our kids and grandkids. I think that would resonate with most of Main Street America.
And by do less, you just mean spend less, correct?
Sure. I mean, in running a business, you don't have the luxury of losing 25% on the revenues that you've got to spend or more than you take in. And yes, and Medicare Trust Fund goes broke in 4.5 years. Social Security's in jeopardy, and we keep shrugging our shoulders.
This budget bill is currently being reviewed by the Senate parliamentarian, that is the Senate Rules Advisor, to make sure it checks all the boxes and meets the standard for reconciliation. After that process is over, Senate Leader Chuck Schumer says he will bring it up to the floor for a vote next week. And after that, we can expect to see the House move quickly to also pass it over on that side of Congress. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
Today, the House passed the CHIPS Act, which is meant to ramp up domestic production of our computer chips or semiconductors. 25 Republicans voted to pass it in the House, joining the 17 Republicans who voted yes in the Senate. The CHIPS Act is now off to the White House for a signature from the president. A 2-hour-long call between President Biden and Xi Jinping. What are Washington and Beijing saying about it, and how are rising tensions over Taiwan playing out? NTD's Iris Tao has more.
Amid rising tensions over Taiwan, President Biden talks with China's Xi Jinping for 2 hours and 20 minutes in their first call in months. It comes as Beijing is warning of forceful actions if House Speaker Nancy Pelosi indeed visits the democratically ruled island of Taiwan. In Chinese state media quotes Xi as warning Biden that, quote, those who play with fire will perish by it. But the White House declines to say it marks an escalation.
They had a very direct conversation. And that they've known each other for some time.
And the U.S. says that Biden underscored to Xi that the U.S. strongly opposes unilateral efforts to change the status quo or undermine peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. And in addition,
he raised genocide and forced labor practices by the PRC. That is something that he raised, about the human rights, as he always does.
But the White House says Biden and Xi also talked about working together.
With particular focus on climate change and health security.
And Senator Ted Cruz tells NTD's Melina Weisskopf that he thinks the administration is being too soft on the communist regime.
The United States should not purchase electric vehicles that are made with slave labor in concentration camps in China. And I've suggested we name John Kerry the customer of the year for the Chinese concentration camps because he is the single largest purchaser of products that they are made under forced labor.
Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
Tensions between the U.S. and China are rising as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced her plans to visit Taiwan again. How do her Republican colleagues view this trip? I chatted with Congressman Brad Wenstrup about the trip and U.S.-Taiwan relations.
Congressman Brad Wenstrup, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, as always. Thank you.
Congressman, I want to ask you about Speaker Pelosi. She's planned a trip to Taiwan. She's faced some pushback from the Pentagon and the executive branch advising her not to go. I guess, first of all, why do you think that is? And second of all, do you think that that is proper advice?
I'm surprised that they're engaging, and especially engaging publicly if they have an opinion like that, to not go. I think that she's the Speaker of the House, and whether I agree with her on anything at all really doesn't matter. She's Speaker of the House. I hope if she goes, that she goes with a bipartisan group as opposed to what was done when she went to Ukraine and just took Democrats. I thought that was inappropriate, but I think it's important that we engage with Taiwan. They are certainly a key trading partner for us, and so why not? And if the White House is saying don't go, I'd be very curious as to say why not. We've always had a relationship with Taiwan. Why not continue it? I know they're afraid it might offend China. Look, this administration, what they did in Afghanistan, for example, they set the date of August 31st. We're going to get out. We're going to be out August 31st. First of all, as a military man, that to me is not good strategy, telling your enemy what you are going to do, or for that matter, we tell our enemies what we're not going to do. And in that case, in Afghanistan, that became the red line for the Taliban. They gave us the red line. You better get out by that date. This isn't who the United States is. We are a superpower. We need to continue to work from a component of strength, but in the nature of providing peace. We want peace through strength. And I'm not sure why they're saying don't go talk to Taiwan. If you think back, President Trump, when he first got elected, the Democrats and the left made a big brouhaha over him even talking to the leader of Taiwan. You might recall that.
Indeed. Congressman, I want to ask you, with this on the table right now, there's rumblings of a potential invasion. Outside of the Speaker visiting Taiwan, what else do you think the U.S. can do to try to prevent such an act?
Well, one of the things is what we're doing in Ukraine and what the Ukrainians are doing. So the combination of our involvement, Europe's involvement, and and what the Ukrainians have been able to do on their own, their morale, their strength, their courage, I think these are lessons that China is trying to learn from. What I would caution the White House about is understanding that China is looking at what we have done with sanctions, for example, on Russia. And they're going to learn from that. They're going to try and learn from that and try to avoid that type of a situation. Look, they want to take Taiwan. Look what they did in Hong Kong in going against the agreement and the accord there. They want to take Taiwan. They just want to do it at the right time. And let's try and make it so there's never a right time.
Congressman, I want to switch gears a little bit. You're a physician. You're also a member of the Doctors Caucus. Right now, the Democrats are talking about, federalizing drug prices. Can you tell us why you think that's not a good idea?
Well, first of all, I think one of the things out of the chute is they're robbing Medicare to then subsidize the Affordable Care Act, and that's just money going to insurance companies. That's not even going to patients for care. But that's the way the bill is written right now, is with the intent of taking money from Medicare to go to the Affordable Care Act. So the other problem with it is when you start getting involved with that and you start capping prices and dictating prices from the government, it stymies innovation. And we are the leading country in the world when it comes to innovation, treatments, new therapies, and we want that to continue. But when you start getting the government involved with capping prices rather than a fair market and a free market, then innovation is going to be shut down. You won't have the ability to get a drug to market, perhaps because they'll say, well, we're not going to pay for that. So, and if we do, you can only charge this amount. If you don't agree with that and you go and charge your regular amount, they're going to tax you. They're going to tax you on your gross revenues at 95%. This is a terrible idea, but it's obviously a way they want to force people into this program. But I'm afraid that we will lose our pharmaceutical industry in the United States because they don't have to be here, but we certainly want them here.
Congressman Brad Wenstrup, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.